Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex figures and towering artistic movements and give you the essential knowledge you need to be an instant expert. Today we are focusing on a monumental figure in art history, François Auguste René Rodin. He is the man whose name is synonymous with modern sculpture, known globally for works like The Thinker and The Kiss.
Yeah, and what's immediately crucial to understand about Rodin, who lived from 1840 to 1917, is the sheer paradox defining his life. I mean, he's universally hailed as the founder of modern sculpture, right?
Absolutely. Everyone knows the name.
But his entire career path was defined by a series of continuous rejections, controversies, even outrageous accusations of cheating. He started as this meticulous, traditional craftsman, really steeped in the technical side of things,
Okay.
only to emerge as a radical pioneer who fundamentally changed how you look at form and emotion in art. It's quite the story.
Okay, let's unpack this for you. Our mission today is to trace exactly how this French sculptor, despite his, well, pretty traditional schooling, managed to execute a complete departure from the staid academic expectations of mythology and allegory.
Right. How did he get away from all that?
We're going to explore how he embraced radical naturalism, modeling the raw, expressive human body, cementing his incredible legacy, but, and this is key, only after enduring constant, painful battles with the very sponsors and critics who were supposed to support him.
Yeah, they really fought him.
We've compiled material detailing his rough life, his revolutionary workshop methods, and maybe the true stories behind those iconic works you thought you already knew.
And to appreciate the depth of his revolution, you really have to understand the depth of his struggles first. The establishment.
Yeah.
They fought him every single step of the way. It wasn't an easy ride.
Right. So Rodin didn't come from a privileged background that granted easy access to the art world. He was born into a working-class family. His father was a police department clerk.
Humble beginnings, yeah.
He was largely self-educated, starting to draw around age 10, and spent his adolescence, maybe between 14 and 17, attending a specialized art school called the Petite École,
Ah, yes, the little school.
which focused heavily on art and mathematics for students destined for craft work. Now, that sounds like good practical training, but how did the academic elite view this background?
Well, that practical training, the very foundation of his later genius, was actually held against him. He developed excellent technical skills, sure, and a keen eye for 18th century decorative art.
Mm-hmm.
But this clashed terribly with the academic tastes of the day. And here is where the setback truly defined him. Rodin was denied entrance to the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts, the official gatekeeper of French art, not once, but 3 separate times.
3 times? That's astounding. If he was already so skilled, what was the reason for this repeated rejection?
Well, frankly, the entrance requirements weren't exceptionally high, which makes the rejection sting even more.
Right.
The judges were just dominated by neoclassical tastes. They wanted idealization, smooth perfection, adherence to classical form. Rodin's early attempts, rooted in that 18th century style from the Petite École, were likely considered too rough, maybe too earthy.
Not refined enough.
Exactly. Entirely lacking in the idealized grand manner they demanded. This rejection, while probably crushing at the time, was a bizarre kind of blessing, really. It forced him onto a different non-academic track.
So, cut off from the academy, he became, well, a pure laborer. He spent nearly 20 years, from roughly 1857 to 1877, just trying to make a living.
He had no choice, really. He had to function as a craftsman and ornamenter. He created decorative objects, worked on architectural embellishments, for instance, spending time in Belgium, helping with the ornamentation of the Brussels Stock Exchange.
Oh.
This 2-decade period of focused, often grueling labor was absolutely indispensable. It gave him an essential, comprehensive technical mastery of materials, of scaling, of composition, skills that, frankly, no academically trained sculptor probably possessed to that degree.
He learned it all from the ground up.
Exactly. Clay, stone, bronze. He knew it inside out.
But in the midst of this struggle, he experienced a deeply personal crisis that made him nearly abandon art altogether.
Yes. In 1862, his older sister, Maria, died. Rodin was utterly overcome by guilt, believing he was somehow responsible because he had introduced her to an unfaithful suitor.
Oh, wow.
He abandoned sculpture completely and joined a Catholic order, the Congregation of the Blessed Sacrament, as a lay brother. He genuinely intended to leave the world behind.
What saved him? What pulled him back from staying in the order?
The founder, actually, St. Peter Julian Aymard. Aymard was apparently a highly perceptive man. He recognized Rodin's profound artistic talent and also realized that his emotional temperament, his intense creative drive, Well, they were wholly unsuited for the rigid life of the order.
He saw it wasn't the right fit.
Not at all. Aymar gently but firmly encouraged Rodin to return to his art, recognizing that his calling was in the studio, not the cloister. This intervention was just, well, a pivotal turning point. It returned one of the world's great sculptors back to his destiny.
So, having honed his craft and overcome this personal trauma, Rodin finally saved enough money to travel, leading to the next immense influence, Italy in 1875.
Yes, after about 6 years working outside of France, mainly in Belgium, he'd scraped together enough savings for this pivotal journey. He visited Italy, and the experience just completely transformed his artistic trajectory. He was profoundly affected by the works of the Renaissance masters, especially Donatello and most significantly Michelangelo.
What was it about Michelangelo's work that resonated so strongly with him? He wasn't exactly known for smooth perfection either.
No, and that was the point. Rodin later stated it quite plainly. It is Michelangelo who has freed me from academic sculpture.
Freed him?
Yes. Michelangelo's late work, particularly the raw, powerful, sort of unfinished quality of figures like the slaves, which showed struggle and strain rather than effortless grace, that spoke directly to Rodin's desire to inject real, raw emotion into form.
Okay.
It basically validated his instinct to reject the static, idealized perfection of the neoclassical school he'd been bumping up against.
And this raw power, this new influence, led almost immediately to his first major public piece, The Age of Bronze, in 1877, and his first massive scandal.
Right, straight into controversy. The work was a life-size male figure, based on a Belgian soldier, actually. Rodin posed him unconventionally with his right hand reaching up and resting on his head, a sort of pensive, almost ambiguous pose. And Rodin worked tirelessly to capture the subtle reality of the human form. He studied his model intensely, made numerous preparatory clay models, and even used candlelight to observe how shadows played across the muscle structure. Really obsessive attention to detail.
And this mastery of light-shadow anatomy, it was so convincing that it led to that infamous accusation.
The accusation of surmelage, casting directly from a living model, which, you have to understand, was like a capital offense in 19th century academic art.
It wasn't just cheating in a minor way.
No. It wasn't just an accusation of taking a shortcut. It was an accusation that he lacked the fundamental intellectual skill necessary to translate the living body into art. Academic sculptors believed the artistry lay in the transition, the modeling, the intellectual interpretation, not mere replication.
So that accusation completely dismissed his 20 years of intense craftsmanship. It must have been infuriating.
Absolutely. Rodin was furious. He vigorously denied the charges, writing letters to newspapers, arranging for photographs of the live model to be compared with the sculpture, pointing out subtle differences in size and posture.
Trying to prove it wasn't a direct copy.
Exactly. The controversy was intense. It really polarized the art world. Fortunately, the Minister of Public Instruction at the time, Edmund Turckhead, recognized the work's genuine quality. The state purchased it for 2,200 francs.
Which wasn't much, right?
No. While it offered validation, it only barely covered the cost of casting the bronze. But it was something.
That validation and the purchase proved crucial. But Rodin wasn't finished responding to the critics, was he? His next work was a kind of technical retort.
Indeed. He felt he had to prove definitively that he was a master sculptor, not just some clever caster. That retort was St. John the Baptist preaching, completed in 1878.
Okay.
And to preempt any further surmelage charges, he deliberately made this second male nude explicitly larger than life, standing almost 6 feet 7 inches tall. The size alone basically declared this could not have been cast from a man.
Right. A clear statement. But the true technical genius seems to lie in the movement of St. John. It's a figure that suggests dynamic action while remaining firmly planted. How did he do that?
That's the real shift toward modernism. Unlike the static poses of previous centuries, St. John seems to gesture and stride forward. But you're right, the feet are both entirely on the ground, yet the figure suggests a walk in progress.
It's contradictory.
It is. Rodin used this contradictory position intentionally, aiming, as he described it, to display simultaneously views of an object which in fact can be seen only successively. It was about capturing the sensation of movement, the feeling of it, not just freezing a single pose.
And the model for this piece wasn't some idealized figure from mythology either.
No, not at all. The initial model was an Italian peasant who apparently possessed this idiosyncratic, rough, powerful sense of movement. Rodin was so compelled by this raw energy that he felt he had to capture it.
So the form came first.
Absolutely. The title St. John the Baptist preaching was only applied after the figure was modeled. This really emphasizes Rodin's focus shifting towards spontaneous, naturalistic movement over preordained religious or historical subject matter. This was a monumental departure from academic rules.
So the critical acclaim, however grudging, for St. John and the state purchase of the Age of Bronze brought Rodin his defining opportunity. A massive commission in 1880 that became his artistic laboratory, didn't it? The Gates of Hell.
It was a defining moment, yes, though deeply ironic in the end. Rodin was commissioned to create this magnificent bronze portal for a planned museum of decorative arts in Paris.
Sounds prestigious.
Hugely. The profound irony, though, is that the museum was never actually built. Yet Rodin dedicated the bulk of the next 4 decades of his life to this colossal, monumental group.
4 decades on a project for a building that never existed. What was the sheer scale of the work?
It was staggering. The portal was intended to depict scenes from Dante's Inferno in high relief. Over the years, the piece just evolved and grew, ultimately comprising an astonishing 186 figures in its final, albeit technically unfinished, form.
186 figures.
Yeah, and Rodin's vision was revolutionary. He completely rejected the ordered, balanced compositions of tradition. Instead, he created this visually disordered, chaotic, almost untamed depiction of hell. The figures aren't interacting in classical groups. They're physically and morally isolated in their own private torment.
So, if the museum was never built and the piece remained technically unfinished, why is it so important to his legacy? Why do we talk about it so much?
Because the Gates of Hell served as Rodin's ultimate artistic incubator. It was like a repository of forms, a laboratory where he experimented constantly with human emotion, with composition, with movement. Many of his most famous self-contained sculptures that we recognize today.
Like the Thinker.
Exactly. They began life as small, sometimes almost overlooked, designs for the gates. They are masterpieces that emerged, almost like spin-offs, fully formed, from the turbulent conceptual framework of that great portal.
Okay, let's discuss the most famous example then, the Thinker. When people see it, they usually associate it with deep intellectual reflection, right? But what was its humble initial role on the gates?
Well, it was originally placed right on the lintel, that's the horizontal support above the doorway, and initially titled The Poet.
The Poet, not the Thinker.
No. It was intended to represent Dante himself, gazing down, contemplating the damned souls swirling below him in the Inferno. Over time, though, its meaning broadened. Observers have also ascribed the anguish of the biblical Adam, maybe the defiance of the mythological Prometheus, to the figure.
So it became more universal.
It holds this universal appeal because it seems to embody multiple forms of existential struggle, not just Dante's specific observation.
But you argue that the power of the Thinker is less about the brain and more about the body. How does Rodin communicate that emotional tension?
Right, this connects back to Rodin's core belief. The total body expresses the mind. He intentionally gave the Thinker this rough, muscular physicality, stressing emotional tension over purely abstract, quiet thought.
He made thinking look like hard work.
Exactly. Rodin explicitly confirmed this. He said, "What makes my thinker think is that he thinks not only with his brain, with his knitted brow, his distended nostrils and compressed lips, but with every muscle of his arms, back, and legs, with his clenched fist and gripping toes." The struggle of thought is physicalized. It's externalized in every fiber of his being. And remember, the original piece for the gates was much smaller, about 27.5 inches high in bronze, not the huge monumental versions we often see in museums today.
It's incredible to think that The Kiss, another work known for its, well, almost smooth, romantic perfection, also derived from the chaotic scenes of the gates. It speaks volumes about the creative freedom this commission must have offered him.
It really does. The commission provided a crucial professional boost, not only a stipend, but also a free studio. This finally allowed Rodin to leave his steady, but maybe restrictive, part-time design position at the Sèvres National Porcelain Factory.
So he could dedicate himself fully?
Yes, fully to a sculpture. This artistic freedom, however, well, it deeply complicated his personal life around the same time.
Right. This new environment led directly to his intense and often, well, destructive relationship with Camille Claudel.
Exactly. In 1883, Rodin met Camille Claudel. He was supervising a sculpture course for another sculptor, Alfred Boucher, and she was a student there. He was just 18 and already a supremely talented artist in her own right.
Just 18?
Yeah. What followed was a passionate and extremely stormy relationship that lasted about 15 years.
And it wasn't just a relationship between an older master and a young model. Sources say she was a genuine artistic partner, maybe even a rival.
Oh, she was far more than just a muse. Claudel assisted him on numerous large-scale commissions. including potentially helping model figures for the gates and the Burghers of Calais.
So she was in the workshop, hands-on.
Definitely. Their influence was symbiotic. It went both ways. Rodin introduced her to his expressive naturalism, sure, but she arguably injected greater classical discipline and maybe polish into some of his forms. And her own work was acclaimed. Her magnificent bust of Rodin, for example, received high praise at the 1892 Salon.
So why did this powerful partnership eventually fracture? It sounds like they were creatively aligned.
It fractured because of the immense emotional conflict created by Rodin's refusal to fully commit to her. He maintained what was essentially a double life. Rodin had a lifelong companion, Rose Beret, who was the mother of his son, Auguste Eugene. Rose had stood by him during all those years of poverty and rejection.
The early struggles.
Exactly. Rodin felt an immense loyalty to Rose and refused to relinquish those ties for Claudel, even though his relationship with Claudel was incredibly intense.
That refusal must have had a devastating impact on Claudel, who's presumably looking for full commitment, especially from someone like Rodin.
It was absolutely crushing for her. The strain of this conflict, which involved, immense jealousy, professional rivalry simmering beneath the surface, and just sheer emotional exhaustion, eventually became too much. The relationship soured completely, and Rodin and Claudel finally parted ways around 1898.
A difficult end.
A profound personal loss for both, I think, even though he remained loyal to Rose. He wrote to Rose during one absence, reflecting on her enduring fidelity. "I think of how much you must have loved me to put up with my caprices. I remain, in all tenderness, your Rodin." Shows the complexity, doesn't it?
Rodin may have been finding artistic freedom in his studio, working on the gates, but it seems every time he brought a major public commission into the light, he faced outright hostility. Let's look at the incredible battles over the Burghers of Calais, commissioned between 1884 and 1889.
Oh yes, the Burghers. This was a monument commissioned by the town of Calais to commemorate one of the great stories of, English and French history. 6 leading citizens of Calais offered their lives to King Edward III to save their besieged city during the 100 Years' War.
A heroic tale, so the local committee had a very clear traditional expectation, I imagine.
Exactly. They wanted an epic, probably allegorical monument celebrating the central hero, Eustache de Saint-Pierre, the leader.
One guy on a pedestal looking noble.
Precisely. They expected a single, traditional, heroic figure, probably mounted on a tall pedestal, conveying stoic, unified sacrifice. Rodin, he conceived something entirely different. He presented a collective study in human struggle and doubt.
How so?
He deliberately ensured that all 6 men were given equal weight. There's no single hero dominating. And he conceived the sculpture as a study of the complex, varying emotions under which they were laboring. Fear, resignation, defiance, profound spiritual isolation. Each man is individualized, isolated in his own struggle, even while they're standing together.
That individualization and emotional complexity must have been utterly confusing, maybe even offensive, to a public expecting straightforward heroics.
It was confusing and unsettling, yes. But the truly revolutionary proposal that angered the committee the most concerned, the display itself. Rodin didn't just sculpt a radical piece. He proposed a radical spatial relationship between the art and the viewer.
Okay, tell us more about that. What did he want them to do with it?
He wanted the monument's traditional high pedestal eliminated entirely. Gone. Rodin argued that the work should be placed at ground level without any railing or barrier.
So people could walk right up to them.
Exactly, so that viewers could walk directly among the figures, experiencing their scale and suffering intimately. He wanted the viewer to penetrate to the heart of the subject, as he put it. And he designed the positioning of the 6 figures to subtly guide the viewer around the group, forcing a full 360-degree confrontation with their plight.
He was challenging the whole notion that public sculpture must be remote, monumental, untouchable, something you look up at.
Absolutely. He wanted intimacy and confrontation, not distance and awe. The Calais Committee was incensed by this untraditional concept. They saw it as a gross lack of respect for the heroes, frankly.
So they ignored him.
Completely. In 1895, they overrode him and displayed the work on a tall, classical platform, surrounded by a railing, precisely what he didn't want. It completely neutralized Rodin's intended effect.
That's frustrating.
It's a tragic footnote, really, that only after the work suffered damage during World War I and years after Rodin's death was the sculpture finally displayed as he originally intended at ground level near the town hall. It took decades.
If the Burghers controversy was challenging, the battle over the monument to Balzac seems like it was a complete artistic disaster, at least in his lifetime.
Oh, the Balzac.
Yeah.
The commission began in 1891. It came from the Société des Gens de Lettres, the Society of Men of Letters, and was meant to honor the, well, famously massive, rotund French novelist Honoré de Balzac.
Not an easy subject to make heroic in the traditional sense.
No, Rodin struggled immensely with the challenge of representing such a complex, physical, and intellectual figure. This struggle is really visible in the huge number of studies he produced over several years.
What were some of the different approaches he tried in those studies? He didn't just jump to the final version.
Not at all. He produced dozens of small studies in larger figures nude, showing Balzac's famously large stomach and rough form.
Really? Nude studies?
Oh, yes. Then figures wearing a traditional frock coat, and figures wrapped in a loose dressing gown, or robe, a replica of which Rodin had actually requested the Society send him so he could study the drapery properly.
He was really wrestling with it.
This struggle just demonstrated his relentless pursuit of the subject's essence, not just his physical likeness. What was Balzac, really?
And what was the essence he finally settled on for the final piece?
Well, he depicted Balzac cloaked in that drapery, the author's robe, which concealed much of the physical body but exaggerated the head and the powerful stance. The face was deeply gouged, forceful, almost monumental, looking intently into the distance.
What was he trying to capture?
Rodin intended to capture Balzac not in a static pose, but at the very moment of creative conception, to express the immense courage, the exhausting labor, and the intellectual struggle required for genius, the sheer effort of creation.
But the public and the very society that paid for it did not see genius or struggle. They saw, well, a punchline, apparently.
The reaction, when the plaster was exhibited in 1898, was overwhelmingly hostile, just brutal. The Société rejected the work outright, claiming it simply did not represent the novelist. The press ran vicious parodies, calling it a huge comic mask crowning a bathrobe.
Ouch. A bathrobe.
Yeah. Even critics, who were generally supportive, noted that such an unconventional representation struck many viewers as artistic slang, almost an insult to the author's memory.
Imagine the emotional toll this took on him personally after putting years of intellectual and creative energy into it. 7 years, wasn't it?
7 years of struggle. It was a monumental public failure, a huge slap in the face from the institution that commissioned him. Rodin, in what must have been one of the most disheartening moments of his career, actually repaid the commission fee.
He gave the money back?
He gave it back and moved the colossal plaster figure to his own garden at Meudon. He was so disillusioned by the whole experience that he never completed another public commission afterward. That was it for him.
But what's fascinating here is the complete turnaround in critical opinion over time. It wasn't universally hated forever.
No, absolutely not. The initial hostility was extreme, but Rodin had fervent supporters from the start, including major figures like the painter Claude Monet, the composer Claude Debussy, and the powerful politician Georges Clemenceau, who signed a manifesto defending him and the work.
Some people got it.
Some people got it. And eventually, art history vindicated him entirely. The renowned art historian Kenneth Clark later praised the Balzac as the greatest piece of sculpture of the 19th century, perhaps, indeed, the greatest since Michelangelo. High praise indeed.
Wow. From bathrobe to Michelangelo.
Right. But it took time. It wasn't even cast in bronze and placed on the Boulevard du Montparnasse until 1939, over 40 years after its rejection, long after Rodin was dead.
Okay, so this whole litany of rejection, from the Beaux-Arts right through to the Balzac, it leads us to the core question. Why was Rodin so disruptive? Why is he, above all others, credited with founding modern sculpture? What was he actually doing differently?
Well, it really comes down to a radical shift in aesthetic focus.
Yeah.
Rodin fundamentally rejected the idealism of the ancient Greeks and, the decorative polish of the Baroque or Neo-Baroque movements that were still influential.
He wasn't aiming for pretty.
No. He was a naturalist. He was concerned not with idealized perfection, but with raw, emotional character. He prioritized expressing inner life, psychological complexity, the stuff going on inside.
So if the Academy wanted smooth, idealized skin, Rodin gave us rough, textured flesh that captured the play of light and shadow, the feeling of muscle underneath.
Exactly. His work emphasized the individual and the palpable, tangible concreteness of flesh. He used textured, sometimes deliberately unfinished surfaces to suggest internal emotion and vitality. And he believed profoundly that an individual's character was revealed by every physical feature.
Not just the face.
Right, that every part of the body, not just the face, spoke for the whole.
And we saw that perfectly articulated in his quote about the thinker, remember? Where the contemplation is carried by the clenched fist and gripping toes.
That concept, the total body as expression, is absolutely central. He saw suffering and conflict as fundamental to modern existence, and therefore they had to be the hallmarks of modern art. He was echoing the raw, sometimes turbulent vision of poets like Charles Baudelaire, whom he admired.
So he took the physical form and made it a mirror for existential struggle, for the modern condition.
You could say that, yeah. He made the body think, feel, suffer visibly.
This leads us to his most radical methodological innovation, maybe, the idea of the fragment as an autonomous work. This is the concept that sounds revolutionary even today, a piece missing parts being complete.
He was utterly radical at the time. Rodin views sculptural fragments pieces intentionally lacking arms, legs, or sometimes even a head, not as failed attempts or damaged studies, but as complete autonomous works in themselves.
Why? What was the point?
Well, this moves sculpture away from the necessity of portraying an accurate likeness or telling a complete narrative story. It moved into a realm where forms existed purely for their own expressive potential, for the power of the gesture or the tension in the torso itself.
So when we see a piece like The Walking Man, which is basically just a torso and legs, the missing parts are a statement, not an unfortunate omission.
It is the essence of his statement, and to understand how he achieved this, how he thought this way, we need to look into his workshop practice. It's quite revealing.
Okay.
Rodin's primary focus, personally, was the handling of clay. He would make quick, expressive sketches in clay. These would then be refined and, crucially, cast in plaster. He relied heavily on highly skilled assistants, called partitions, to carry out the often laborious scaling up or down and the carving into marble or casting into bronze based on his plasters.
So the plaster casts were key. They weren't just an intermediate step.
They became the foundation of his revolutionary process. This is the genius of his method, really. Because clay deteriorates quickly, plaster casts were necessary just to preserve the form.
Standard practice.
Standard practice. But Rodin's innovation was recognizing that these casts were not just molds or preservation tools, they were raw material. He would accumulate dozens, sometimes hundreds, of plaster parts in his studio arms, legs, torsos, heads from different projects, different times.
Like a library of body parts.
Exactly. And then he would recombine them, mixing and matching parts from different figures to create entirely new compositions, often giving them entirely new names.
That sounds like an almost architectural or collage approach to the human body building new structures from existing components. Let's use The Walking Man as the ultimate case study for this radical approach.
The Walking Man, created around 1899-1900, is the perfect example of this composite method. It wasn't sculpted from scratch as a single idea.
Right.
Rodin apparently found two neglected, maybe even damaged fragments from the 1870s lying around in his studio. A broken, armless torso study, and the lower extremities, the legs, from a statuette version of his earlier St. John the Baptist preaching.
The one he made bigger to avoid the cheating accusations.
That's the one. He fused these two disparate pieces together, the old torso, the old legs.
So two forgotten fragments were united to create this singular, incredibly powerful statement of aggressive forward momentum.
Yes. It's an act of reassembly that gives the fragments a new, fierce, and totally autonomous life. The very fact that it lacks arms and a head only serves to enhance its focus on the sheer physical force of the stride, the musculature of the torso and legs. It's a bold piece of anti-academic defiance, literally created from the detritus, the leftovers, of his earlier work.
His process for working with live models was also quite revolutionary compared to the stiff required poses in the academic studios he was denied access to.
Absolutely. He totally rejected the traditional academic postures. Rodin preferred his models to move naturally, even spontaneously, around the studio despite their nakedness, which was still quite shocking to some.
He wanted to capture life, not poses.
Exactly. He wanted to capture motion, not stillness. He would sketch them rapidly in clay or on paper, often without taking his eyes off the model or his pencil from the paper, just seeking to capture that instantaneous vital force, that spark of movement.
We have that fantastic anecdote from George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, when he sat for his portrait. He described the rapid changes in the bust Rodin was creating right in front of him.
Shaw was apparently amazed. He described the bust's rapid evolution in just 15 minutes, noting how Rodin's hands seemed to take the work through all the stages of art's evolution.
In 15 minutes?
Yeah. He said it began as a rough Byzantine masterpiece, then morphed into a form intermingled with the energy of Bernini, and then achieved the elegance of Houdon, another great sculptor. Shaw concluded that Rodin's hand worked not like a typical sculptor's, but like the work of élan vital, the vital force itself, shaping the clay.
That concept, élan vital, the life force, It really speaks to the kinetic, living quality he injected into the clay. And while he became famous or infamous for these dramatic, controversial figures, it was portraiture that ultimately ensured his financial survival, wasn't it?
Portraiture was his anchor, financially and sometimes critically. Rodin created thousands of figures and drawings, but portraiture was essential for winning acceptance among the powerful and achieving financial independence.
Good, the lights on.
Pretty much.
What?
He produced at least 56 documented portraits between 1877 and his death, depicting major figures of the day. We mentioned George Bernard Shaw, also the composer Gustave Mahler, and the powerful French politician Georges Clemenceau. These commissions provided the consistent income necessary to fund the massive, decades-long non-earning project like The Gates of Hell.
Okay, so by the turn of the century, around 1900, despite all the battles, all the controversies, Rodin was finally an established international figure. The scale of his recognition seemed to balloon almost overnight.
Yeah, his reputation just exploded around the time of the 1900 World's Fair, the Exposition Universelle, in Paris. He did something quite clever. He actually bypassed the official fair structure. Instead, he funded and operated his own pavilion of his art nearby.
A solo show right next to the main event. Bold move.
Very bold.
Yeah.
And it captured massive attention. His income from portrait commissions alone reportedly reached an astonishing 200,000 francs a year around this time, making him properly financially independent for the first time in his life.
Wow.
This success attracted tremendous admirers, including, famously, the young poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who actually served as Rodin's secretary for a time, and wrote a highly laudatory, very influential monograph about the sculptor.
It's interesting, though, to note the contrast between his growing acceptance in certain European circles and the difficulty he apparently faced cracking the American market.
Yeah, acceptance in the United States was initially quite fraught. It was primarily due to prevailing moral standards, sort of puritanical streaks, that clashed violently with the frankness of Rodin's technique, and especially his frequent use of the nude form.
Too much skin for the American.
Basically, yes. This contrast was starkly illustrated at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Rodin's nudes pieces like Cupid and Psyche, Sphinx, and Andromeda caused such a public uproar.
What uproar?
Oh yeah, such an uproar that they were ultimately hidden behind a heavy drape in a separate area. You needed special private permission just to view them.
So his work was literally deemed too scandalous for public consumption in America at that point.
Pretty much. It took the dedicated efforts of curators like Sarah Tyson Hallowell, who acted as an advisor and promoter, to introduce his work carefully to major American collectors like the Palmers in Chicago and Isabella Stewart Gardner in Boston. Charles Yerkes, the transit magnate, was likely the first American to own a major Rodin sculpture, purchasing 2 large marbles. But American acceptance remained slow and tentative for many years.
Conversely, he developed a significant and loyal following in Great Britain much earlier, didn't he?
Yes, thanks largely to friends and champions there, like the artist Alphonse Legros and the influential poet and editor William Ernest Henley, who recognized his genius early on. Rodin became a regular visitor to Britain after 1900.
He felt welcome there.
He seemed to. And this culminated in a major act of generosity during a time of international crisis. In 1914, at the outbreak of World War I, Rodin donated a significant selection of his work, I think about 18 pieces, to the British nation as a gesture of solidarity.
A significant gift.
Huge. He had truly cemented his place in the Anglo-American art world by then, even briefly serving as president of the International Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Engravers in London in 1903.
As he entered his later creative years, what occupied his artistic attention? Did his focus shift?
It did seem to shift, yeah. His focus turned intensely toward the female form and themes of overt masculinity and femininity, often expressed through dynamic movement. He concentrated on small dance studies, capturing motion with incredible spontaneity.
More movement studies.
Yes, and he also produced thousands of erotic drawings, often executing them very loosely in the same rapid style he used for his model studies, famously drawing without lifting his pencil or taking his eyes from the model. Just pure observation flowing onto the page.
We hear about his fascination with dancers in particular during this late period.
Dancers were definitely key muses for these kinetic studies. He was utterly enchanted by the Royal Ballet of Cambodia dancers during their performance in Paris in 1906.
Cambodian dancers.
Yes, quite exotic for Paris then. He produced some of his most famous, fluid, almost frenetic drawings from that experience, capturing their unique movements. He also sketched the American modern dancer Isadora Duncan, and, well, reflecting his lifelong passionate temperament, he apparently attempted, rather unsuccessfully, to seduce her.
Always the artist, always the man. His personal life saw a final, brief moment of closure after that lifetime of complexity with Rose Beret, his companion.
Yes. After 53 tumultuous years together, through thick and thin, Rodin finally married Rose Beret on January 29, 1917. This gesture of lifelong fidelity, though incredibly late, perhaps provided some form of reconciliation or peace for them both.
53 years.
Tragically, though, she died just 2 weeks later, on February 16.
Oh, no.
Rodin, who was already frail and suffering from illness himself, possibly the flu pandemic that was starting, followed her later that same year. He died on November 17, 1917, at age 77.
And his physical legacy, his work, is cemented in France thanks to his careful planning before his death.
It is. Rodin had the immense foresight, really, to will his entire studio, all of his plaster casts, his drawings, his collection, and crucially, his casting rights to the French state.
Everything.
Everything. This incredibly generous decision led directly to the founding of the Musée Rodin in 1916, which opened shortly after his death in 1919 at the Hôtel Bion, the beautiful Parisian mansion where he had lived and worked. Today, the museum holds the largest collection, over 6,000 sculptures alone, plus drawings and more. It's dedicated to maintaining the authenticity of his output.
And as his ultimate epitaph, what marks his grave?
As he himself wished, a cast of the thinker was placed next to his tomb in Meudon, just outside Paris, serving as his headstone. It's a fitting end, isn't it, for a man who dedicated his life to showing that the entire body is merely an expression of the conflicted, powerful human mind.
Rodin's influence is just undeniable. He is recognized, really, as the single most important sculptor of the modern era. He restored sculpture's ancient power to capture not just likeness, but physical and intellectual force.
His influence spread globally, shaping a whole new generation of artists who came after him. Sculptors like Antoine Bourdelle, Constantin Brancusi, even Henry Moore later on, all owe a debt to Rodin. Brancusi, in fact, initially worked briefly as one of Rodin's assistants.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, though he famously left after only about a month, saying, "Nothing grows in the shadow of a great tree." He felt compelled to find his own path, but significantly, he only sought his path after studying the master up close.
But the very method that helped preserve his legacy, the ability to make multiple authorized bronze casts from the plasters, also created one of his greatest modern challenges, the huge problem of forgery.
Yes, Rodin is reliably among the top 10 most faked artists globally. It's a huge issue. His unique workshop method, which relied on those authorized bronze reproductions cast from the original plaster models he left to the state, well, it made forgery a tempting proposition.
Because plaster is relatively easy to copy.
Exactly. Unauthorized copies, sometimes made from legitimate casts, sometimes from newly made molds, became widespread. The Musée Rodin has spent decades trying to research, catalog, and manage this problem, which is why the French government eventually had to step in with legislation.
How did they try to control this market for casts?
Well, it's 1956. France has promulgated laws that limit authorized editions of an artist's work, meaning casts, made after the artist's death under the estate's authority, to a maximum of 12 casts.
Maybe 12.
12 numbered casts, plus usually a few artist proofs. This ensures that any piece beyond that limited edition cannot be considered a genuine, authorized, posthumous work, and helps control the supply and maintain value. Despite the challenge of fakes, verified Rodin works, of course, command massive prices. Like that bronze Eve Grand Model version Saint Rocher, a large Eve figure it sold for $18.9 million back in 2008.
Wow. What an incredible journey. From being rejected 3 times by the academic establishment and basically living as a mere craftsman for decades, to fundamentally inventing a new, emotional, and fragmented way of sculpting that continues to influence art today. Rodin survived early rejection and poverty by mastering the craft.
Only to completely revolutionize that very craft, based on the powerful lesson he took from Michelangelo, that truth and emotion were more important than polish.
Yeah.
And if we look back at the core innovations, what truly distinguishes him, I think, is threefold. First, that absolute commitment to radical naturalism over tired idealism. Second, the revolutionary use of the fragment as an autonomous, expressive artistic statement, perfectly exemplified by the reassembly of the Walking Man.
Right, the fragments.
And third, the transformation of a failed commission, The Gates of Hell, into a 4-decade laboratory for exploring modern psychological and physical expression. He succeeded because he insisted, against all odds, on modeling the body to express the complexity of the conflicted human mind.
Rodin's life and art are just so defined by struggle, The fight for recognition, the emotional toll of controversies like Balzac, the chaotic, unfinished beauty of the gates. It leaves us with a really provocative final thought, doesn't it?
I think so. Consider this for yourself. Rodin's most profound modern legacy rests significantly on works that were either technically unfinished, like The Gates of Hell, or were deliberately presented as fragments, like The Walking Man. They challenged the very definition of what a complete sculpture even was. So maybe in a world like ours, full of continuous information and constant change, is the true power of knowledge or art, sometimes found not in the polished, final, perfect product, but in the incomplete, in the turbulent process, in the struggle itself. Rodin's career teaches us that the highest acclaim, the most lasting impact, can emerge directly from what was originally deemed a failure, a controversy, or just a fragment. Something to think about.